final session of Writing Through Fear. I hope you've had a good week and that you have gotten a lot of good writing done. Before we begin, let's just have a moment of silence to bring ourselves into the room and leave the outside world outside for the next couple of hours. So if you'd like to join me whenever you're ready, just gently close your eyes or relax them. Take a couple of deep breaths in and out through the nostrils. And we'll just sit for 1 minute together, please. And after your next exhalation, gently open your eyes and come into the room in soft focus. Welcome. So we began this course looking at the primary fear stories that are active for us today in our lives, recognizing that narrative is what colors our experience and creates the image, the story through which we live our lives. And fear, of course, is one of the major themes of that story. So by examining the stories connected to our fears, we're able to get underneath them, push the raw emotion aside and see what is actually driving them, what are perpetuating those stories. You know, what those emotions, rather, what are the narratives that are driving those emotions? How do we keep them going? Then last week, we looked at relationships and fear around intimacy, fear around relationships, as well as self-love and the obstacles to self-love, what it is about caring for ourselves, esteeming ourselves, letting ourselves off the hook. That can actually be quite scary for some folks. There's a common belief that unless we keep beating ourselves up or keeping ourselves, holding ourselves guilty or ashamed of what we've done in the past, that somehow we're going to devolve into evil human beings, that we're going to lose our conscience. And we tend to equate self-flagellation with virtue and self-blame with being a conscientious person, when in fact, those two have very little to do with one another. In fact, it's hard when we're feeling badly about ourselves to be conscientious because our hearts are shut to ourselves. We tend to withdraw, and it's hard to see other people clearly when we're being so hard on ourselves. Today, we're going to be looking at two unlikely fears, things that folks aren't generally aware of being afraid of. And those are the fear of power and the fear of freedom. Now, like love, power and freedom are held to be the highest ideals in human culture. And it's believed that anyone supposedly would be attracted to personal freedom and personal power. And in a world of secure people, that might be true. But in the world as we know it, where insecurity and self-esteem are such issues, where anxious, avoidant, complicated people are the majority, and this sense of self and confident self can be quite slippery. The opposite is actually often true. You know, many people are terrified of their own power and all that it implies. They avoid knowing their true dimensions because if they did know it, they fear that if they did know their own true dimensions, that they would need to change and grow and overcome this self-imposed, diminished sense of self. If we have power, we have responsibility. If we have responsibility, we may feel obligation. And when we feel obligation, we worry about failing. The fear of failure, of course, strips us of our confidence. So there's a progression from the fear of power to this loss of confidence. It's much easier, or can seem much easier, to kind of stand aside and let the power go dormant and pretend it's not there. And the same thing goes for freedom. This goal that apparently has universal appeal actually is very unappealing to a lot of people. We're creatures, after all, who require both independence and connection. We require solitude as well as security with others. And often we find ourselves in a position of thinking that we need to choose one over the other. We need to choose. Many people think that they have to choose either freedom or security, which of course is a false choice, but it's one that we set up in our dualistic, polarizing way of seeing. It's either that or this. It's black or it's white. And of course, the vast majority of people opt for security, or at least the illusion of security. Given the choice between captivity and freedom, a lot of us willingly stay inside our cages, even though the door of the cage may be open. We clip our wings, so to speak, to attain a sense of belonging. And then we wonder why we feel so cramped and disempowered and trapped in our own lives. There may be so many things to choose from that we freeze. We get paralyzed, overwhelmed by anxiety over not knowing which way to go. So we opt to stay inside our self-imposed enclosure to avoid what Emerson called this terrible freedom, the freedom that we have to make our own decisions and our own choices. Now, why is freedom terrible? Why did Emerson believe that we avoid our freedom at all costs? It's because, of course, we're afraid of doing it wrong. We're afraid of making mistakes. We're afraid of getting stuck. We're afraid of being humiliated or failing altogether. We may fear success and failure equally, in fact, since both of them put us in the driver's seat and give us visibility. Marianne Williamson said this better than anyone I know. You're probably familiar with this quote, but it's really worth repeating. Marianne says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Isn't that great? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. Many of us have been in that position of feeling like we're being virtuous if we play it small, if we shrink to fit. We equate that with modesty, but in fact, it's false modesty. We equate it with humility when in fact, it's not humility. True humility acknowledges our own power, but doesn't put us above other people. We acknowledge the power in all beings. That's what people don't understand, who equate feeling powerful with being arrogant or being conceited or somehow being superior to others. Not at all. That isn't what humility is about. Humility is acknowledging our actual proportions so that we neither play it small nor inflate ourselves into grandiosity. When we stop fearing our power and freedom, we come to know ourselves as we are, now, underneath all of these layers of self-negation. And when that happens, there can be an extraordinary awakening that takes place. And that is, of course, why crisis can be so awakening for us, because it pushes us beyond our comfort zones. Remember that fear is the voice that says you can't. Fear is the voice that says no, why bother, who cares, who do you think you are? But in hard times, these questions become much less important if we hope to survive. Those questions are really luxuries that people under the gun can't afford. In fact, from powerless circumstances, very often our greatest powers may emerge. From the greatest captivity or feeling of entrapment, the voice of freedom may be strongest because we're fighting against those limitations. We come to recognize that there is, in fact, an alchemical connection between fear and power. When we're pushed beyond our limits, that's when we touch into that alchemical process that can happen when we move past what we think is possible for us and who we believe that we are. I learned this in my own life, how fear can become an initiation into a higher way of being. I'd just like to read you a passage from my book, When You're Falling, Dive, that gives you a sense of what I'm talking about. That terror can, and in fact, be a door to enlightenment. Fear can be the door to our own freedom. While traditional cultures have long understood the empowering aspects of fear and wounding, the double-edged sword of passage rites to galvanize and deepen the spirit, we are too often shielded from this secret knowledge. Our prevailing contemporary view of pain and loss as handicaps to be avoided at any cost is not only wrong-headed, but deeply ass-backward. Terror is fuel, wounding is power. Darkness carries the seeds of redemption. Authentic strength isn't found in our armor, but at the very pit of the wounds each of us manages to survive. As one woman put it to me, strength doesn't mean being able to stand up to anything, but being able to crawl on your belly a long, long time before you can stand up again. Transformation is in our wiring. Isn't that wonderful? It's not about investing in our armor. It's about recognizing that real strength comes from struggle and the willingness to keep getting up after we've been knocked down. That's what real strength is. Otherwise, it's just impetuosity. Real strength comes from being tested and knowing that we have been tested. And the same thing goes for freedom. You know, when we're thrust out of our familiar context, like King Lear on the heath confronting the elements, that's when we are increased, we're strengthened, we're liberated by being tested, and when we're invited to choose our own direction. In these days of lockdown and withdrawal and so much uncertainty in the world, freedom is a major topic, and the fear of freedom as well. Because as scared as folks are inside their own silos, a lot of people are more afraid of returning to the outside world, frightened of getting their freedom back, and also being confronted by other people who are doing the same. Because at the end of the day, freedom reminds us of our own power. While we may not be free externally, we may not be able to change our circumstances. That's not what freedom is about. Freedom is an inner choice. Freedom is an orientation. Freedom is recognizing that in any given moment, we have the ability to choose how we respond to our circumstances, no matter what those circumstances are. So while it's helpful to shift the externals when we're able to make our lives easier, to make freedom more accessible, it's not necessary to do that. Freedom comes from within. It comes from how we hold ourselves in relationship to our lives and what we believe is possible for us. How deluded we are by the stories of no, and you can't, and you're not free, and powerlessness that we inculcate ourselves with throughout our lives. So why don't we move into our first writing? Fia, could you please pull up that first card? Here we are. I'd like you please now to take 20 minutes to write about whether you are afraid of personal freedom. Are you afraid of your own freedom? If so, in what way? And if not, why not? Be as specific as you can be. We'll take 20 minutes to do that, please, and then we'll come back together as a group. 15 more minutes, please. How do you define personal freedom? And what is it about that that is scary to you? 15 more minutes. 10 more minutes, please. How in your personal life today do you not feel free specifically? 10 more minutes. Five more minutes, please. If you finish early, go back and reread what you have written and see where you can take it deeper, see what you might have missed or sort of covered over without exploring. 5 minutes. One more minute, please. Let's start to finish up. And let's come back together as a group. Welcome back. Put your writing aside for the moment. So, how was this for you, exploring your own fears of freedom and also how you define freedom? That can have a lot to do with the fear that freedom instills in us. How do we look at freedom? What do we believe that it is? What do we believe that it's not? Really important questions to explore. Sophia, why don't we go into breakout for 15 minutes now, and then we will come back together and have some conversation. Welcome back, folks. So I'd love to hear from you. How was this writing exercise around freedom? Were you able to touch into fears around particular kinds of freedom in your life? It would be great to talk a little bit before we move into our next writing.
Do you want me to unmute people or do you want them to do it in the chat?
Actually, let's do chat on this one so we don't run out of time. And then at the end, we'll do video and stuff. Anyone have any questions or comments about this particular exercise or the practice in general, things that you are not understanding or would like to talk about? Okay. If folks, okay. Do we have anything in chat?
Not yet. It usually takes people a minute to type things in.
Okay, I thought I saw something from Maria.
She said she's sorry, she just joined.
Oh, okay. No worries.
Okay, how do you distinguish power and freedom? I realized I was writing about personal power during the first writing.
Okay, and they are connected, but they're not the same. Obviously, power is empowerment across the board in many different areas of our lives. That personal power, for example, could be the power to be committed in a relationship. The power could be power to connect, to stay, the power to be part of a community. Which are not necessarily the same as the power of freedom, which may be to break away, to go to find your own path, and to stand on your own. That really is the what freedom is about. It's about a feeling of self-reliance that says that we are okay on our own, and that can of course be about connecting, or it can be about going our own way. So they're not really identical, Cynthia. I hope that's helpful.
Conrad has written, I wrote a lot, but ended up focusing on how much I dwell on my own failings when I am quite forgiving of the errors in others.
Thank you, Conrad. So the question is, what's the payoff for doing that, Conrad? Why in an exercise, for example, when we're invited to explore freedom, did you go to your own failings? What's that attachment? What comfort do you find there? What scares you about moving past your own failings and actually thinking well of yourself and giving yourself credit for your own strengths and power? What is it about those failings that has a magnetic pull on you? How do you identify or over identify with them? Do you not let yourself off the hook? Do you tend to keep yourself in a guilty place where you of self condemnation or self judgment? This is really important stuff to look into for all of us. So thanks a lot, Conrad.
Cheryl says, issue with freedom, added responsibility and obligation, which feels unfree. Also, I like having someone kind of tell me what to do next, to direct me, and then I kind of resent that loss of freedom, but also feel alone without the other.
Well, perfect, Cheryl. So that you have that, you see that you're in a perfect no-win kind of catch-22 situation where it's easier to give your power away or to not have to make your own choices, and then you get to feel disempowered for that. And it keeps one in a place of paralysis and stasis and not being able to know what is true for us. And so ask yourself, what are the payoffs for that, for feeling disempowered? And what would it feel like to accept the fact that you have much, much more freedom than you acknowledge? And what about the freedom inwardly to choose how you respond to elements of your life? Is that something you also prefer to give away to others? This is important stuff because it goes to the heart of a feeling of purpose and meaning in our lives. If we have no sense of agency, if we have no sense of personal choice, it's very difficult to have the sense that our lives have meaning and real purpose, because all of our power is given away to other people. So this is worth looking at more deeply in writing. Yeah, thanks.
Anna says, I had some great insight, realizing that my fear of power connected to responsibility stemmed from being the eldest sister and getting in trouble for what the younger siblings did. Thank you.
Good. Right. So Anna, in some way, power has been equated with blame. It's been equated with taking responsibility for other people's problems or other people's failings. That's an important confusion to untangle. It's a long time since you were that eldest sister in that family. So what is it that keeps you in that narrative now? What comfort do you find in worrying about being blamed and therefore not taking on your own freedom or your own power? That would be worth looking into. Yeah. Thank you, Anna.
Heather said, the definition of freedom can go many ways. We talked about the power of just observing, the freedom of being silent, and finding the strength in the quiet.
Yes, Heather. I'd say, Heather, that's the foundation of freedom, is finding that quiet so that we can be mindful about our own responses. And that's really where it begins. It's the freedom within our own minds. And then once we have that, once there's some stability and some clarity, then we can choose how we want to act or not act. It gives us agency. We're then in the driver's seat of our own vehicle, so to speak. So it's not that we're controlling everything, but we absolutely have the ability to control the way we choose. How we choose to respond. That is within our power. Although it's sometimes hard to take that responsibility on because, as I said earlier, it comes with obligation, it comes with fear of failure. So sometimes it's easier to say, "Oh, I can't do anything. It's outside of my control," or "I'm not free." It can become a very convenient excuse. So we don't want to denigrate ourselves and blame ourselves and get on our own case, but it's important to acknowledge when we're copping out, when we're not stepping up, when we're not acknowledging that the cage we're pretending we're trapped in actually has an open door and we're choosing not to go outside of it. And that is a choice. And it's fine if we want to stay inside, but don't blame someone else or circumstances beyond our control, because that really becomes an excuse, and it's simply not true. Thank you.
Other Heather says, I recently had a pretty significant expansion of freedom after living with restrictions. I really focused on exploring my personal freedom during that time, and now they are not there in the same capacity. Not having the restrictions present in my life in the same way feels unexpectedly scary.
Mm-hmm.
Any prompts to explore why this feels scary after I actually felt pretty comfortable in the areas of personal freedom that I am faced with? My breakout room partners had some great suggestions to see it as an adventure, for example.
To see it, thanks, Heather, to see it as an adventure, and also to understand what it is now that scares you about moving into the next level of freedom. Initially, it felt like it was a rush. It felt terrific. And then what came up? What did you have to face that then intimidated you and made you feel like, this freedom is not as appealing as I thought it was? What came up? That's really the question. After that first blush of liberation, what choices are you confronted with? What are you avoiding that you can't avoid anymore? Notice what came up, because that's what it sounds like. It's like the honeymoon was over, and now it's about getting married to your own freedom and this power that is always with you. So it's worth looking into. Thank you, Heather.
Looks like one more comment question. It was important to me to stand up for myself regarding being first in a queue. Small thing, but I stuck to my guns because the person who knowingly lied was a young mother, and she thought I would just say, go ahead. She knew she was lying because she had asked me if she could pass me. I said, yes, of course, but I'm in a queue. So power to express and power to choose to let it go.
Okay, I didn't completely follow that in terms of the queue. What queue were you in? It sounds like she asked you permission, you gave her permission, but then I'm not sure what happened. Maybe could you read that one again, Fia?
Or maybe I'll unmute Maria and
Sure.
she can say what she means. Okay, Maria, unmute yourself.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Maria.
I'm so sorry, everyone. I'm late, and one of the reasons was I was in a queue in a vegetable shop, and so I was in the queue, and I was the first in the queue on the right. And a lady behind me said, "Excuse me, can I pass you?" I said, "Of course you can, but bear in mind I'm in the queue." Well, she proceeded to start another queue on the left side with another person, and when it came to payment, the people at the front said, she's in the queue, she's first. Now, obviously, I lose my power in situations like that because I tend to shout. I tend to make sure I'm heard. And that isn't always the best way. I haven't learned to maximize a feeling of true power that comes from being able to let go and compromise for the sake of peace. But you know what? The issue here was that I just could not get over how this person, the epitome of what is valued in society today, young mother, beautifully dressed, beautiful, perfect child, for Christ's sake, So, and then there's me, 60-something, whose trigger happens to be invisibility, and so on. And something like this happens. So, of course, this event is the epitome of power and lack of power and feeling that powerlessness. And it dominated the whole event, which is not really important, but it is important in terms of what it showed me. And it ties in to what we're talking about, I think, Mark.
Yes, it does tie in. But what's interesting to me, Maria, is hearing you tell the story is the add-on there. It's not just a woman. Oh, it's a woman who represents something to you.
Yes, of course, I know.
There's all these things that you don't have.
Yeah.
So then it all gets very, very murky. What are we really talking about? Are we talking about envy? Are we talking about power? Are we talking about classism? Are we talking about competition? That's bigger than just a feeling of personal power.
But now you hit it on the nail. So what the hell do we write about? Do you write what you were like when you were an addict at the age of 20? Or do you write what it's like to be a refugee 20 years later? Or do you write what it's like to be now in the present on an event like this? And
you stay in the present. You stay in the present. What is real for you now? Otherwise, you're going to get lost in characters you were in the past.
Right.
What's it like for you now, knowing what you know? Obviously, there's backsliding. There are ways that you can't always live your own wisdom. but you're not that refugee now. You're not that traumatized person
Yeah.
that you were in the past. So stay present with it and write about what it means for you now, and what are the stories that are still active
Right.
for you. So it's fascinating hearing you tell this little story about the being in the market. It's a saga that's so much bigger than what actually happened.
Yes, of course.
And
But
that's
yes,
based on all those narratives that are still playing.
but you still want to perhaps refer in your writing to how something carries a charge if it is connected to something in your past, but you don't
Absolutely.
set out to write about your past.
Exactly. No, because the charge is happening in the present. It may be connected to something that happened a long time ago, but it's happening right now.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so what we do with self-inquiry through writing is write about what is true for us as we are sitting there. It's
Oh,
not
that's such a relief.
yeah, that's the way to do it. It's not the ultimate truth, Maria. It's not the absolute truth. It's the messy, changeable, complicated truth of this moment. That's what we want to write to. Yeah.
I've got a lot to say more, but I better not.
Well, let's thank you, Maria. Let's go into our next writing, and then we're going to have time for conversation at the end. So, could we pull up that next card, please, Fia? Here we go. And many of you have been talking about power already, but this will take you deeper into this inquiry around fear of freedom and power. In what ways do you deny your own personal powers? Okay, what are those things about you that are strong, unique, powerful, free that you suppress, and why? Okay. And if you don't deny your personal power, if you're among those rare people who feel fully empowered, then please elaborate, explore that. Why is it that you feel, how is it that you feel so powerful? Okay. What are the stories that support that? We'll take 20 minutes to do that, please, and then we'll come back together as a group. 15 more minutes, please. What personal strengths, powers, gifts do you suppress and why? 15 more minutes. Ten more minutes, please. What scary things do you associate with being powerful? 10 more minutes. 5 more minutes, please. Who might you be and what might you do if you were not afraid of your own power? 5 more minutes. One more minute, please. Let's start to finish up. And let us come back together as a group. We're going to now break out into breakout groups for only 10 minutes so that we have sufficient time at the end of the class for us to connect and do some closing out business. So 10 minutes, please, Fia, and then we'll come back together. Welcome back, everyone. I hope that you had a good breakout group. And I'm very interested in knowing how this writing about personal power and the aspects of ourselves that are unique, that have potential, that actually scare us, that we suppress for different reasons related to fear. So why don't we open up the lines, Fia, and see if we can have some conversation.
If people want to put up their hands or just wave wildly, we can call on you. Looks like Heather wants to talk. Go ahead and unmute.
Okay, so for the question, what scary things do you associate with being powerful? What came up for me was not having anyone to depend on. So being alone, being isolated.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you know where that story comes from?
I think it does have a family of origin kind of thing going on. My family were entrepreneurs and we did everything. We had a family business and it was all, my parents had a ton of responsibility at all times and they ended up being very successful. But it was always like things like, when holidays came around, all the managers would go on holidays and my parents had to take care of everything because no one else took that responsibility. Right. They didn't understand that someone had to keep running things.
Right.
Things like that I experienced. And
have you had that yourself in your adult life where you felt left alone holding the ball?
Well, I guess in my personal life, yes, I did end up not in the same way at all, like in a very different picture. But yes, yeah, I have as well. And managed a situation for a decade where I was like no one really knew what was going on and how much I was carrying.
Because you didn't tell them?
Yeah, because I didn't tell people, or I didn't think they'd believe me, or I didn't think they'd understand. A number of I just had all these reasons why.
And also you were brought up with this idea, like you take it on yourself and nobody's going to be there really to support you. So why bother sharing the information?
Yeah. And it really almost did me in, and my health started failing. I'm not at all the same person I used to be very super fit. And I got to a point where it all became too much. And like in the last 5 years, and it just like everything started falling apart. And I was still like clawing my way, trying to make it look like, I finally did end up in a situation where I had to ask for help, and I did, and I found that it was there and that I wasn't alone.
Right.
But it was
so it would be interesting, Heather, for you to start to reframe this story about what responsibility looks like.
Yes.
And what would an interactive relationship look like with others who could support you?
Yes.
Do you find it humiliating to ask for help? That would be a good question to ask. Do you have people around you whom you trust? You know, these are just questions to explore on your own. Are there people who you would trust to support you and be able to, you know, take up the slack if you needed it? You know, I would recommend looking at what a vision of shared responsibility would look like for you, because that's going to help you grow. You know, otherwise there's going to be a point where you get beyond a point, you say, well, I'm not going to be able to do that on my own. And that's how we keep ourselves smaller than we need to be.
That's so interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks.
Thomas has his hand up. Want to unmute, Thomas?
Hi.
Hi, Thomas.
How you doing? This is a thing that's come up for me in terms of, I even forget the subject matter we're talking about, but something about to feel more power, to feel more, it's basically to feel more aliveness. And I had bouts when I was a kid where I felt all this ecstasy in my body, even in tough situations. And then I realize now when I feel too much pleasure or too much pain, I find something. If I feel too much, I find either eating or going on YouTube this last year or whatever are distractions or even distracting relationships. So I find that it almost feels what I bumped into here again, but I haven't seen it in a while, was that emptiness, not filling in stuff. Emptiness seems to be an access to feeling more alive. So the basic question for me is always, how do I feel more alive? And I realize I can feel more alive, but I don't have the stamina to feel alive too long. I got to go do something. I used to get off on being creative and get the endorphin effect of being creative, and that was good, and that built some stamina. But how do I be alive in other areas, in the political, in, you know, social, political realm, whatever, you know? It's like, how do I build the stamina there? And I think it's the sort of shakiness of the emptiness and allowing myself to build stamina there. That's all I'm coming up with.
Can you say something more about the shakiness of the emptiness? That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a certain, as I was saying to my group there, sometimes I feel desire when I'm in there, and I realize I'm of a certain age where a lot of these desires I start feeling or longing for will not be completed, maybe. Or I feel more desires than I know what to do with. So I don't know how to anchor the desires. And so there's emptiness and there's desire and there's a certain, so what do I do with all that? So I kind of like, that's a little bit.
So there's an
anxiety.
Yeah,
Things are not complete.
Yeah, no, I hear that. So there's an assumption that because you feel desire, you have to act on it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that if energy or feelings come up, then you have to do something about them.
Good point.
And so that feels intimidating for you.
Right. So I have to be with the desire, I think.
Yes. When you recognize that desire is an energy, it's just part of an aliveness, a vivacity, a part of being here. You realize that you can feel the desire and you can channel that energy any way you want it. Right. So, for example, if a person is feeling a lot of sexual desire, for example, in a situation where that can't be satisfied, what can you do with that sexual desire? What creativity can come out of that desire? What can you write? What can you paint? What can you create? What sort of other service can you do to fulfill that need to be connected? Right. We can take that energy and channel it in many different ways. But the mind says, if I admit that I want that and I don't get that, that's going to hurt. So I'm not going to feel that.
Right. I'm going to eat instead.
I'll eat instead. And we all know how well that works.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Thomas. And that's where art comes from. You don't have to be an artist, by the way, to create art. You know, art comes from a feeling of desire of some kind that may not be able to find its object. And so we write poems, and so we paint pictures, and so we do other things that use that energy in ways that are creative and growthful for us. Yeah, that's possible, but the suppressing of it doesn't lead to happiness or well-being. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Thomas.
And Cheryl has commented, I know what my gifts are, but I don't know how to use them in the real world. I didn't finish my doctoral psych degree, so I feel limited. I can't do that without the degree. But I see others doing things like leading workshops or doing presentations without the degree.
Yes, Cheryl, that's a great story to get past, because particularly nowadays, it's possible to teach and do many other things outside of academia, where a doctorate was necessary. A lot of that isn't necessary anymore. Of course, there are things you need a doctorate to do if you want to practice, if you want to be, reimbursed by insurance and that kind of thing. But if that's not the case, ask yourself, how do you use this absence of a doctorate as a false obstacle, something to shut yourself down. And then say, what could you do? What can you do that's along the lines of where your passions are, maybe in the field that you stopped doing your dissertation in, but that you can actually continue with. That, and then there's a third option, which is finishing your doctorate. So I mean, I don't know where you are in your life, if that's even a possibility. But I do know folks who have gone back for their doctorates in their 50s and 60s and completed them. So ask yourself, what feels most alive and interesting and creative for you today? What feels possible for you today? And how do you use that dissertation story to shut yourself down? That would be a great thing to look at, Cheryl.
Okay, thank you. Can I talk? Because it's my question.
Yeah.
No, but I just don't know how to use it. What I have learned, I've learned so much. I don't know how to use it. Like you said, what other avenues? I haven't found any other avenues that don't require the degree.
So let's talk just a little bit about what was the degree in?
It was in psychology.
Okay, and your intention was to practice as a psychologist?
Yeah. But I don't need to do that. I mean, I could do, presentations or whatever, but where, how do you just step into that?
What field of psychology are you interested in?
It was in Jungian psychology.
Okay. And if you could do anything, let's pretend the degree wasn't an issue, what would you really love to do?
That's a good question. I like speaking to groups.
Okay. And what would you want to speak to them about?
All the things I've learned about the psyche, the unconscious, but apply it more to the real world, or real, real issues that are happening with people and how they can use them.
Good. Sounds great. So you have some clarity about it, and I would encourage you to take the next step. Let's get a little more specific, about what specifically you would like to work with people on, what kinds of issues, what particular kinds of kind of information do you want to communicate? With Jungian psychology is an enormous field.
Right. No. Yeah.
Is it couples? Is it creativity? Is it self-exploration? Is it
probably
archetypes?
It's probably wounding,
Okay.
Trauma, wounding. Yeah.
Okay, so we're getting a lot more. So you want to work with people around wounding and trauma from a Jungian perspective?
Right.
How much training do you have in the Jungian world? How much schooling do you have?
I just have 3 years. I completed everything except the dissertation.
Oh, okay.
But it's not clinical, it's theoretical. And I thought, in lieu of the dissertation, I was trying to write a book. And that is so difficult. I mean, it's just, especially now in the pandemic, it's very lonely. So I've been trying to do that for 15 years and I haven't done it. So maybe I should give it up.
Or get clear on what it really is. Like, what would the book be?
About trauma. Yeah.
So about trauma and healing.
Yes.
Cheryl, could you write to me personally, and I'll give you some prompts.
Sure.
To kind of help you get clearer on this.
Okay.
There are many things that you can do with the training that you have. Do you have a master's or?
No, they didn't. You didn't get a master's along the way. No, I have an MBA, but that doesn't.
But that's something. Write to me. I'm going to send out something to the class tomorrow with my contact information.
Okay.
And you can write to me through my website. And I mean, you can write it down now. It's contact@markmatusik.com.
Okay.
Drop me a note today. I'll send you some deepening prompts. There's a lot you can do. And this is the golden age of entrepreneurial teaching. So the fact
Yeah,
that we have Zoom, that we have all these other ways of doing it, we don't need to be in academia. Having started a PhD program and dropped out because I didn't like it, I really do know what I'm talking about here. You don't have to take the conventional route.
Okay, it's just the conventional route provides the direction, and now I don't have direction.
To a certain extent, I mean, that's part of your story. Is you think if I had that, then I'd be clear.
Exactly.
You don't know that that's true. It might give you more choice, and that might be confusing to you. One last question: can you imagine doing your finishing a doctorate?
No.
Okay, all right. So it's about working with what you have now to work to help people around wounding and trauma.
Right. Or other issues. There's dialogue, a lot of things I've studied.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's contact@markmatusik.com.
Yeah, contact@markmatusik.com. Just drop me a note and we can be in touch.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Any more questions, Fia, or comments?
No, but people could wave their hand wildly. Oh, looks like Michael wants to talk.
Michael?
Hello. When given, are you afraid of your personal freedom? I immediately wrote down yes and no. And so the yes had to do with, yes, I gave up my personal freedom very early, but it was replaced by what I call survival freedom. And somehow I got the two were conflated for me. So my survival freedom was quite excellent.
What do you mean by survival freedom?
Well, this is the thing. So survival freedom had to do with how can I go out into the world and interact and be in the world and have a sense of agency.
Right.
And I did that by what I call survival, as opposed to trying to understand, as opposed to my personal powers. So I didn't connect myself. I looked at the world and I went, where can I go? What will feel right and safe and good? And I'll enter that, and I'll hang out there. And I'll know how to behave because I can read the cues quickly and continue on. Right. So people would think that I had personal power and agency, but inside, and I thought I did too for a long time. And then I discovered no. And so then I thought, well, what is that? What's the difference between survival power and personal power? Mm-hmm. So when I looked at personal power, I thought, what happened to that? And I mentioned, well, it was killed. It was killed thoroughly from the get-go. So what does that mean? It means that anything that I thought, anything that I endeavored to do, anything that I created, it was completely destroyed. Mm. So I equate personal power with death. Mm-hmm. And I equate survival power with life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I came to a yes or no on this particular question.
Right.
And now, and if we're writing from the here and now, I'm no longer in that place, in that same place, but it's a fairly recent discovery. And trying to embrace and connect with one's personal power is a whole nother. We wrote a whole lot about that too, and what does that come up with? And in all kinds of different things. Some of the other people have talked about it, but it can have to do with all the things that you've kind of failure, and if you don't succeed at it, and there's going to be no one there, all kinds of stuff that comes out of trying to embrace one's personal power. Yeah. Anyway.
But when you explore those stories, you may find that you're not as scared of those imagined outcomes as you tell yourself you are. So having come through survival power, having gotten that, having come as far as you have, you are stronger, it sounds to me, than you acknowledge. And you probably have more personal power, and that personal power is more active in those survival power years than you may give yourself credit for. I don't really see the big difference between personal power and survival power. I mean, I understand how survival power is more specific and more, the agency is more within, but you're probably stronger than you acknowledge. You've been using this personal power probably much more than you are aware. And these stories, Michael, these outcomes that you imagine around personal power may not be as scary to you as you tell yourself that they are. For example, let's just play a game. Okay, so let's say, give me an example of something that you are afraid of failing at.
Any subject. I'm afraid of failing at anything that I try to do.
Okay, but give me an example. Just give me any specific.
Okay, what makes that hard for me to answer is that when I start anything, I usually feel pretty good about doing it.
Okay.
And then what happens is if I wind up being able to have some facility for it, and I move along, and in a certain sense, you go up the ladder, and if that's recognized by a person in authority or the person who's involved, whoever I'm involved with, the minute that gets recognized in some way, that will begin the ending of my going any further.
Do you know that that's true, or is this an assumption?
Well, it's played out in my life. I mean, I can give you many examples of those.
Yeah. But that's all. That was then, this is now. Do you know that it's true for you today, meaning who you are?
Well, today, who I am today, every day is changing right now. Happen to be in a place that is, I'm feeling like I'm moving through stuff at the speed of light. It's really quite wild. So today, I don't think I would fall into all of these categories, but exploring them helps me understand what I might be, what I'm going through at the moment. What's happening now.
Yes, but you're not actually, from what you're saying, you're not actually going through it. This is a story you're telling yourself about what would happen if. So you're telling me on the one hand that you don't think this is really applicable to who you are. And yet you're saying on the other hand that that these fears are very much alive and still active for you. So for you, the exploration is which is true.
Okay, I would say up until approximately a year ago, these were extremely alive for me.
Yeah, but that was a year ago.
Now through this year that I've gone through, it's all been turned upside down in a good way.
Good.
And I'm discovering that these stories are stories.
Yeah.
And they're not a fit for my reality right now. And because of that, life going forward is going to look and feel a whole lot different. It already started. It already has. That's
really what it sounds like, Michael. That's very much what it sounds like. And this old tape is still playing, what if, but you don't seem afraid of these outcomes now. So look at the part of yourself that may be resistant to letting go of that old fear, this old fear character, this old survival character. He's not here now. So how do you resist acknowledging that?
In some ways, I'm going to have to grieve that person for a little bit, I think, because it served me well. It served me well for a long, long time.
So good. Okay. So have a ceremony and take a little time and good, but I wouldn't drag it along too long. You know, it sounds obsolete.
Yeah, no, it is, and I'm really clear about that being obsolete, and the pieces that are going to fall into place because that is making an exit are things that I don't all know yet. They're going to be, and that makes things kind of, well, Thomas used the word alive. It's very alivening, Thomas.
It's very alivening, and there's unknowns, and there's mystery, and there's insecurity, and all of that, anxiety and fear. Oh, absolutely. But it's vital. There's vitality there. I can see it in your face when you talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's so interesting how we're so unwilling sometimes to admit our own healing, and to actually to say it out loud for fear that it will just disappear. That we're not
that bingo. Yeah,
I know, but that's how the superstitious mind works, and that's still fear preying on the mind. So I can't admit how strong I am. I can't admit how much less fear I have now, because then it's all just going to come piling down on me. That's just a fear story in itself. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, you're welcome, Michael. Good to see you. Thank you. Oh, so we seem to have gone over time, folks. Does anyone else have a pressing question that they would like to talk about before we close? Because we can always, you can always reach out to me after the class. Okay, I'm not seeing anything pop up. So, folks, tomorrow I'm going to be sending you personally a list of ways that you can continue doing this practice. And ways that you can be in touch with me for asking any questions whatsoever. I'm happy to give you deepening prompts that are personal for you to help sort of guide you in your ongoing process. And it's just been wonderful being with you for these 3 Saturdays. I've enjoyed it a lot. And thank you to the Rose Center. And thank you so much, Fia, for being our wonderful host.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you,
everybody, for coming.
Thanks. Everybody be well and take good care and keep writing.
Yay.
Thanks, Mark. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mark.